I signed my name on the dotted line, and my sister-in-law's face lit up like Christmas morning. There, I said, setting down the pen. Happy now? Melissa snatched the papers off the kitchen table, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the folder. Finally, some sense from you, Claire. She glanced at my husband, her brother, who stood by the doorway with his arms crossed. David, she signed it. David's expression didn't change. He'd perfected that look over our 5-year marriage. Disappointment mixed with condescension, like I was a child who'd finally cleaned her room after weeks of nagging. Good. This is the smart choice, Claire. For everyone. I almost laughed. In my first life, I'd fought them. I'd screamed that I didn't embezzle $3.2 million from the family company. I'd hired a mediocre lawyer with our dwindling savings, watched him fumble through a case he didn't understand against prosecutors who smelled blood. I'd refused to sign their confession, the one that took responsibility and showed remorse in exchange for a reduced sentence. And I'd gone to prison for 12 years. I died there, actually. Pneumonia, 3 months before my release date. 41 years old in a medical ward that smelled like bleach and defeat, with no one coming to visit. David had divorced me after year 2. Melissa sent a card once, a Christmas card with a photo of her family in front of a ski lodge in Aspen, the one they'd bought with the money they'd stolen from the company and pinned on me. Then I woke up. 5 years earlier, the morning of my 34th birthday. David kissing my forehead before work, Melissa calling to invite me to lunch, the company audit 3 weeks away that would discover the missing funds. I'd been given a gift, a rare, impossible gift, and I wasn't going to waste it screaming my innocence to people who'd never believe me. The arraignment is Monday, Melissa said, sliding the confession into her leather portfolio. With this, the prosecutor will probably offer 7 to 10. You could be out in 6 with the good behavior. 6 years. I let my voice tremble. I'd practiced this. I can't believe I was so stupid. The wire transfers, the offshore accounts, I don't even know what I was thinking. You were thinking you deserved more, David said. He stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of his cologne, the expensive one I'd bought him for our anniversary. You've always had champagne taste on a beer budget, Claire. It finally caught up with you. The irony was almost beautiful. David wore $1,000 suits and drove a Tesla. Melissa lived in a penthouse in Harborview, both financed by the $3.2 million they'd siphoned from Whitmore Industries, the company David's father had built, the one David was supposed to inherit. In my first life, they'd framed me perfectly, created fake email accounts in my name, forged my signature on wire transfer authorizations, set up shell corporations with my SSN. By the time the auditors found the discrepancies, the trail led straight to me, the bookkeeper, the woman who'd married into the family, the outsider who'd gotten greedy. No one had suspected the golden boy and his brilliant sister. I'll call Dad, David said, pulling out his phone. Let him know it's done. I watched him dial. Richard Whitmore, patriarch, self-made millionaire, the man who'd looked at me across the Thanksgiving table last week and said, I always knew David married beneath him. In my first life, Richard had testified against me, his own daughter-in-law. He'd sat in that witness box and told the jury I'd betrayed his trust, stolen from his legacy. He'd cried. The jury had eaten it up. It's done, David said into the phone. She signed it. Yeah, her lawyer looked it over. Some public defender type, I think. She couldn't afford anyone better after you froze her access to the accounts. Right. Okay, see you tomorrow. He hung up. Dad's pleased. He says this shows maturity, taking responsibility. I just want this over with, I whispered. Melissa touched my shoulder, a gesture that might have looked sympathetic to anyone who didn't know her. It will be. Soon you'll be where you belong and the family can start healing. They left together, David pausing at the door to look back at me. I'll have my lawyer send over the divorce papers next week. I think it's better if we don't drag this out. Of course, I said. The door closed. I counted to 60, then walked to the window and watched David's Tesla pull out of the driveway, Melissa's Porsche right behind it. Then I picked up my phone. It's done, I said when he answered. They have the confession. Perfect. Alexander Hunt's voice was smooth, confident. the voice of a man who'd never lost a case in 23 years of practice. How did they react? Like they'd won the lottery. They're about to find out they bought a ticket with Monopoly money. See you Monday morning, Claire, 9 a.m. sharp. Chambers before the arraignment. I'll be there. I hung up and looked around the apartment, the one David had insisted we rent instead of buying, always saying we needed to save for the future he'd been planning without me. In my first life, I'd met Alexander Hunt in prison. He'd been there for a pro bono clinic, and I'd told him my story during a 15-minute consultation. He'd listened, asked sharp questions, and finally said, "You got railroaded. The evidence was circumstantial, the forensics were sloppy, and your lawyer was incompetent. But the confession sealed it. Without that, I could have destroyed their case." I'd cried that day. "I didn't sign any confession." "I know," he'd said, "but the jury believed you did, and that made all the difference." When I'd woken up 5 years in the past, Alexander Hunt was the first call I'd made. I'd emptied my personal savings, the account David didn't know, about the one my grandmother had left me, and paid his retainer. $200,000 for the best defense attorney in the state. Money well spent. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of November day that threatened snow but delivered only freezing rain. I dressed carefully, navy suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back, the costume of a woman drowning in regret. David met me outside the courthouse. He'd brought Melissa and their father, the Whitmore family united in righteous grief. "Claire," Richard's voice was heavy with disappointment. "I never thought you'd stoop this low." I kept my eyes down. "I'm sorry, Richard. I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't restore what you stole. Sorry doesn't undo the damage to the company's reputation." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know I loved you like a daughter. And this is how you repay that love?" In my first life, this speech had broken me. I'd sobbed, begged him to believe me. The news cameras had captured, every moment, the weak, guilty woman facing the family she'd betrayed. Today, I just nodded. "I understand." "Good." He straightened his tie. "At least you're taking responsibility. That's something." We walked into the courthouse together, this strange procession, the criminals and their scapegoat. The prosecutors were waiting in the hallway, Amanda Chen in her second chair, a young man whose name I'd never learned. In my first life, Amanda had been ruthless, efficient. She'd presented the case like a surgeon, cutting away every argument my incompetent lawyer had tried to make. She smiled when she saw me. "Ms. Reeves, I understand you've had a change of heart." "She's prepared to accept responsibility," David said. He'd positioned himself as my spokesperson somehow, like I was too fragile to speak for myself. "That's refreshing." Amanda opened her folder. "We've reviewed the confession. Given your cooperation, the state is prepared to recommend 8 years eligible for ARSA, parole after 5. 8 years? Richard's face flushed. "She stole $3 million. With cooperation and a guilty plea, we can move this through quickly," Amanda said smoothly. "No trial, no media circus. Your company's reputation stays intact. Ms. Reeves does her time, and everyone moves forward." I watched this negotiation over my life like I was watching a play. David arguing for 10 years, Melissa murmuring about justice. Richard finally nodding, accepting 8 years like it was a compromise instead of a prison sentence for a crime I didn't commit. "Ms. Reeves," Amanda turned to me, "do you understand the state's offer?" She understands," David interrupted. "I need to hear it from her," Amanda said. I opened my mouth, and that's when the courtroom doors opened. Alexander Hunt walked through like he owned the building. 6'3" silver hair, a suit that probably cost more than David's Tesla. He carried a briefcase in one hand and a coffee in the other, moving with the casual confidence of a man who'd argued before the Supreme Court twice. Every head turned. "Alexander Hunt," he announced, his voice carrying across the marble hallway, "representing Claire Reeves." I watched the color drain from David's face. "What?" Melissa started. "Claire," Richard's voice rose. "What is this?" My attorney, I said simply. Amanda Chen's expression shifted from surprise to wariness. She knew exactly who Alexander Hunt was. Everyone in the legal community did. Mr. Hunt, I wasn't informed you'd been retained. I'm informing you now. He set his coffee on the nearby bench and opened his briefcase. I'll need a few moments with my client before any proceedings. The arraignment is in 15 minutes, Amanda said. Then we'd better hurry. Alexander's smile was sharp. Claire, I followed him to a private consultation room, leaving the Whitmores and the prosecutor standing in stunned silence. The door closed. Alexander set his briefcase on the table and turned to me. You did well. The confession? I pulled it from my purse, a copy of what I'd signed, the original safely in Melissa's possession. He scanned it quickly, his expression unchanging. Then he smiled. This is even worse than I thought. They really did just copy-paste from a template. Will it work? Oh, Claire, it's going to be beautiful. He checked his watch. In 10 minutes, we're going into that courtroom. The prosecutor is going to present the state's case and expect you to plead guilty. Instead, I'm going to file a motion to suppress the confession. Judge Patterson is hearing the case. I've known her for 20 years. She doesn't tolerate procedural violations. And then we watch their case collapse. He pulled out another folder. While they were busy framing you, I was busy building our defense. Financial forensics, digital trails, witness statements, everything that proves you didn't commit this crime. But the confession they coerced out of you? Alexander's eyes gleamed. The one they obtained without your attorney present? The one you signed under duress while they threatened you with decades in prison? That confession? I felt something unfurl in my chest, something dangerous and bright. They threatened me? According to the affidavit, you'll be signing in approximately 8 minutes, yes. They came to your home, cornered you, told you that fighting would only make things worse, that your public defender wouldn't be able to help you, that you should just accept responsibility, and maybe the sentence would be lighter. He slid the affidavit across the table. Sound familiar? It was exactly what had happened. What they'd said. Word for word. I signed it. Perfect. Alexander tucked it away. Now, when we get in there, let me do all the talking. You sit quietly, you look appropriately anxious, and you do not, under any circumstances, acknowledge that confession's validity. What about David, Melissa, the evidence they planted? One thing at a time. First, we kill the confession. Without it, the prosecution's case is purely circumstantial. They'll scramble to regroup, probably ask for a continuance to strengthen their evidence. That's when we'll file our counter-motion, dismissal based on insufficient evidence and prosecutorial misconduct. Misconduct? Alexander's smile turned predatory. They rushed this case, Claire. They were so eager to nail you that they skipped steps. No proper investigation into alternative suspects. No forensic accounting beyond the surface level. They saw the planted evidence and ran with it because it fit their narrative. He paused. A good defense attorney can work with that. A great one can turn it into grounds for dismissal and an investigation into the real criminals. David and Melissa. David and Melissa, he confirmed. But we have to be patient. Let them think they're winning right up, until the moment they realize they've lost. The courtroom was smaller than I remembered from my first life, or maybe I was just seeing it differently. Judge Patricia Patterson presided from the bench, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She'd been a judge for 30 years, and her reputation for fairness was matched only by her intolerance for games. In my first life, she'd sentenced me to 12 years. I'd hated her for it. Now I understood she'd sentenced me based on the evidence presented, a confession, forensic trails, an incompetent defense. She'd had no reason to doubt what she'd been shown. Today would be different. The State of New York versus Claire Reeves, the bailiff announced. Case number 47832. Amanda Chen stood. The state is ready, Your Honor. Defense? Judge Patterson looked at me, then did a double take when she saw Alexander Hunt. Mr. Hunt, this is unexpected. Good morning, Your Honor, Alexander. Stood, buttoning his suit jacket. The defense is ready. Judge Patterson's eyebrows rose fractionally, the only sign of her surprise. Very well, Ms. Chen, please present the charges. Amanda launched into her opening statement. Embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering. The words washed over me, familiar from my first life, but somehow less terrifying now. I knew how this ended. The state has obtained a full confession from Ms. Reeves, Amanda continued, in which she admits to objection. Alexander's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. The state is referencing a document obtained in violation of my client's Sixth Amendment rights. Judge Patterson leaned forward. Explain. Ms. Reeves Banines signed the referenced document without counsel present. She was approached at her home by family members who convinced her that cooperation would result in leniency, a classic coercive environment. At no point during this process was she advised of her right to an attorney, nor was she given the opportunity to consult with legal counsel before signing. Amanda's face flushed. The confession was voluntary. Was it? Alexander pulled out the affidavit. I have a sworn statement from Ms. Reeves detailing the circumstances under which she signed that document. She was told, and I quote, "Fighting this will only make your sentence worse and a public defender won't be able to help you." These statements constitute coercion and a deliberate attempt to obtain a confession without proper legal representation. Your Honor, Amanda said, the defendant wasn't under arrest at the time. She was free to refuse. She was under investigation for a felony and was pressured by the victim's family to incriminate herself. Alexander's voice remained calm, measured. The state cannot have it both ways. Either Ms. Reeves was a suspect deserving of legal protection, or she wasn't a suspect at all, and this entire case is premature. Which is it? Judge Patterson removed her glasses. Ms. Chen? Amanda shuffled her papers. I could see her mind working, trying to find a foothold. The investigation had produced substantial evidence against Miss Reeves before the confession was obtained. The confession merely corroborated, then the state shouldn't need it. Alexander spread his hands. If the evidence is so substantial, proceed without the tainted confession. The defense won't object. The courtroom fell silent. Amanda looked at her second chair, who whispered something urgently. I watched David in the gallery, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Melissa had gone pale. Richard sat between them, looking confused, like the script had suddenly changed and no one had given him the new pages. Your Honor, Amanda said slowly, the state requests a brief recess to confer. Denied. Judge Patterson put her glasses back on. Mr. Hunt has raised a valid constitutional question. The confession is suppressed pending a hearing on the circumstances of its procurement. Ms. Chen, present your case without it. Your Honor, Amanda faltered. The state requests a continuance to organize our evidence. How long have you been investigating this case, Ms. Chen? 6 weeks, Your Honor. 6 weeks should be sufficient to organize your evidence. The arraignment will proceed. Judge Patterson looked at Amanda expectantly. Your recommendation for bail? I could see Amanda making rapid calculations. Without the confession, her case was weaker. But she couldn't back down completely, not in front of the Whitmores, not after 6 weeks of investigation. The state requests bail be set at $500,000, Amanda said. Ms. Reeves has the means to flee and has demonstrated a willingness to move large sums of money across international borders. The alleged means, Alexander corrected, none of which has been proven. Ms. Reeves has no criminal record, strong ties to the community, and has been fully cooperative with the investigation. The defense requests release on her own recognizance. Judge Patterson considered. Bail is set at $50,000, cash or bond. Next hearing in 2 weeks. I want full evidentiary disclosures from both sides by then. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned! It had taken 11 minutes. I walked out of that courtroom with Alexander Hunt at my side, past David and Melissa and Richard, past Amanda Chen in her second chair, past the court reporters who were already typing furiously on their phones. David caught my arm in the hallway. What the hell are you doing? Defending myself, I said. With Hunt? Claire, do you have any idea how much he costs? You can't afford. I can afford exactly what I need. I pulled my arm free. Did you really think I'd just roll over? You signed the confession, Melissa hissed. She still had her portfolio clutched to her chest like the papers inside were suddenly radioactive. You admitted everything. I signed a document under coercion, I said, echoing Alexander's words. Without my attorney present. Turns out that doesn't hold up so well in court. Richard stepped forward, his face red. Young lady, I don't know what game you're playing. It's not a game, Richard, it's my life. I looked at each of them in turn. And I'm done letting you control it. I walked away, Alexander beside me, and didn't look back. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in legal warfare. Alexander filed motion after motion, each one a surgical strike at the prosecution's case. He demanded full financial disclosure from Whitmore Industries, not just the records they'd cherry-picked to frame me, but everything. 5 years of accounts, wire transfers, internal communications. He deposed Richard, David, and Melissa separately, putting each of them under oath and asking increasingly uncomfortable questions about who had access to the company accounts, who approved transfers, who could authorize shell corporations, and he brought in reinforcements. Dr. Sarah Kim was a forensic accountant with credentials that read like a resume from MIT and Harvard. She'd testified in federal cases, brought down Fortune 500 executives, and had never, not once, been discredited on the stand. Alexander paid her fee from his own pocket, he told me later, because this is the kind of case that defines careers. Dr. Kim tore through Whitmore Industries' financials like a hurricane through a house of cards. The shell corporations were established using Claire Reeves' SSN, she explained to Alexander in his office, the three of us hunched over printouts and laptop screens. But the IP addresses used to create them don't match any device she owned or accessed. They do, however, match IP addresses from 2 locations, David Whitmore's office at Whitmore Industries and Melissa Whitmore's home network. Can you prove that definitively? Alexander asked. I can prove it, beyond a reasonable doubt. Dr. Kim pulled up a spreadsheet. Look at the timeline. The first shell corporation, Meridian Holdings LLC, was created on March 15th at 2:47 p.m. At that exact time, Claire Reeves was giving a presentation to the board of directors. I have meeting minutes with her signature, photos from the presentation, and testimony from 6 board members confirming she was in the room. But the digital signature was forged badly. Dr. Kim zoomed in on the metadata. Someone copied her signature from a previous document and pasted it onto the incorporation papers. You can see the pixel artifacts here, here, and here. An amateur job, honestly. They were counting on no one looking too closely. I stared at the screen. That's David's doing. He always said digital forensics were a waste of money. His mistake. Dr. Kim moved to the next document. The wire transfers are even more damning. They were initiated using Claire's login credentials, yes, but the login locations ping from David's office computer. He was using her password. How did he get my password? I asked, though I already knew. You probably wrote it down somewhere, Alexander said, or used the same password for multiple accounts. Or he watched you type it in. He looked at Dr. Kim. Can we trace where the money actually went? That's where it gets interesting. Dr. Kim pulled up a new spreadsheet, this one color-coded in complex patterns. The money moved through 6 shell corporations, 3 offshore accounts, and finally landed in, well, it's technically still in corporate entities, but those entities made purchases, real estate, investments, luxury goods. She pulled up a photo, Melissa's penthouse in Harborview. Purchased by Meridian Holdings, LLC, the first shell corporation created with Claire's stolen SSN, for $2.1 million in cash. Then there's another photo, David's Tesla, leased through Cascade Investments, another shell corporation, and this, a ski lodge in Aspen, snow-covered peaks in the background. Owned by Summit Properties, purchased for $1.8 million. I remembered the Christmas card, Melissa's family in front of that exact lodge. They weren't even subtle, I whispered. Criminals rarely are, Alexander said. They think they're the smartest people in the room, right up until they're not. He looked at Dr. Kim. Can you testify to all of this? I can and I will. Dr. Kim closed her laptop. Claire Reeves didn't embezzle $3.2 million. David and Melissa Whitmore did. They used her identity to create the paper trail, then sat back and waited for someone to find it. When the audit came, all roads led to Claire, exactly as they'd planned. Except we're not in prison this time, I said. Alexander smiled. No, this time we're taking them to trial. The evidentiary hearing was scheduled for December 12th, exactly 2 weeks after the arraignment. Amanda Chen looked haggard when she walked into the courtroom, her second chair carrying boxes of files that they hadn't had time to properly review. Alexander, by contrast, looked refreshed. He'd spent the 2 weeks systematically dismantling the prosecution's case, and now he was ready for the kill. Judge Patterson called the court to order. We're here for the evidentiary hearing in the State versus Reeves. Ms. Chen, I've reviewed your motion to proceed despite the suppressed confession. Present your case. Amanda stood. Your Honor, the State maintains that substantial evidence exists independent of the confession. We have forensic accounting that traces the embezzled funds to shell corporations was created using Ms. Reeves' Social Security number. We have wire transfer records showing unauthorized movements of money from Whitmore Industries accounts. You have circumstantial evidence, Alexander interrupted, none of which proves my client committed these acts. The shell corporations were created with her SSN. Amanda shot back. Identity theft is a crime, Ms. Chen. It doesn't prove the victim committed it. Alexander stood. The defense would like to call Dr. Sarah Kim to the stand. What followed was a clinic and expert testimony. Dr. Kim walked the court through every piece of evidence, methodically explaining how each one pointed not to me but to David and Melissa. The IP addresses, the forged signatures, the timeline that placed me in board meetings while I was supposedly creating shell corporations, the money trail that led straight to properties and purchases that benefited the Whitmores. Amanda tried to cross-examine, but she was out of her depth. Dr. Kim had been doing this for 20 years. She anticipated every question, countered every objection, and never once wavered. So, Dr. Kim, Alexander said during redirect, in your expert opinion, did Claire Reeves embezzle $3.2 million from Whitmore Industries? No. Who did? Based on the digital forensics, the financial trail, and the ultimate beneficiaries of the embezzled funds, David Whitmore and Melissa Whitmore committed this crime and framed Claire Reeves to avoid detection. The courtroom erupted. Judge Patterson banged her gavel. Order! I will have order! I watched David's face turn purple. Melissa looked like she might vomit. Richard sat frozen, staring at his children like he'd never seen them before. Your Honor, Amanda said desperately, this is speculation. It's forensic evidence, Alexander said calmly. Documented, verified, and ready to be presented to a grand jury. Unless, of course, the state would like to reconsider the charges against my client. Amanda looked at her second chair. Whispered conversation. I could see her making the calculation. The case was falling apart, and now the defense had enough evidence to flip the entire investigation. The state, Amanda swallowed. The state requests a dismissal of all charges against Claire Reeves, pending further investigation. Granted, Judge Patterson banged her gavel. Ms. Reeves, you're free to go. Ms. Chen, I expect a full report on my desk within the week explaining how your office brought charges without properly investigating all suspects. She looked at David and Melissa. Mr. and Ms. Whitmore, I suggest you retain counsel. You're going to need it. The bailiffs moved toward David and Melissa as if on cue. They weren't arresting them, not yet, but the message was clear. I stood up, and for the first time in 2 lives, I walked out of that courtroom as a free woman. The fallout was spectacular. Within 24 hours, the district attorney's office opened a formal investigation into David and Melissa Whitmore. Alexander handed over all of Dr. Kim's findings, along with a comprehensive brief outlining every crime they'd committed: embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, and, his personal favorite, attempting to obstruct justice by framing an innocent woman. The news media loved it. The story had everything: a wealthy family, betrayal, a wrongly accused woman saved at the last minute by a brilliant attorney. My phone rang constantly with interview requests. I declined them all. David tried to call me once. I let it go to voicemail. Claire, we need to talk. This is all a misunderstanding. Dad is furious, and Melissa is. Look, just call me back. We can fix this. I deleted the message. Melissa sent a text. You're destroying this family. Was it worth it? I blocked her number. Richard Whitmore showed up at my apartment 3 days after the hearing. I almost didn't let him in, but curiosity got the better of me. He looked older. The investigation had aged him, carved new lines around his eyes and mouth. Claire, his voice was rough. I owe you an apology. You do, I agreed. I believed them. David and Melissa, they're my children, and I. He sank onto my couch without asking, his shoulders slumped. I never questioned it. The evidence seemed so clear, and you were new to the family, an outsider. I know. They stole from me, from my company, from the legacy I built. His hands shook. And they were going to let you take the fall for it. My own children were going to send you to prison for their crimes. I sat across from him, maintaining distance. What do you want, Richard? I want to make this right. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. I've removed David from the company. Melissa was never officially on staff, but she'll never have access again. The board voted this morning to install new financial controls and to bring in external auditors. Good for you. And I want you to come back. I blinked. What? You were a good bookkeeper, honest, thorough. He unfolded the paper. It was a letter, typed on Whitmore Industries letterhead. This is a formal offer of reinstatement, with back pay for the time you were suspended, plus a raise, 40% increase, from your previous salary and a seat on the Financial Oversight Committee. I stared at the letter, then at Richard. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you justice, he said. Claire, you were right about everything, and I was wrong. So damn wrong. His voice cracked. Please, let me do this one thing right. In my first life, I'd dreamed of this moment. Richard Whitmore admitting he was wrong, apologizing, offering me vindication. Now, holding the letter, I felt nothing. No, I said. Richard's face fell. Claire, I don't want to work for Whitmore Industries. I don't want to be anywhere near that company, or your family, or this whole mess. I set the letter on the coffee table. You want to make things right? Testify against David and Melissa. Cooperate fully with the prosecution. Make sure they face consequences for what they did. I will, he said quickly. I've already told the DA I'll cooperate, whatever they need. Good. I stood, a clear signal that, this conversation was ending. But I'm not coming back. I'm done with all of you. Richard stood slowly, accepting defeat. I understand, but Claire, Ian, if you ever need anything, I won't. He left, and I locked the door behind him. The trial came faster than I expected. Amanda Chen, humiliated by how badly she'd mishandled my case, threw herself into prosecuting David and Melissa with the zeal of someone trying to salvage her reputation. She brought charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Kim's forensics, the IP addresses, the money trail, everything Alexander had uncovered. David hired an expensive attorney, some slick guy from Manhattan who specialized in white-collar crime. Melissa got her own lawyer, a woman who'd successfully defended several high-profile embezzlement cases. It didn't matter. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery with Alexander beside me. I wanted to watch them squirm. The prosecution called witness after witness, forensic accountants, IT specialists, former employees who testified about David's access to the company systems, Melissa's constant presence in the office despite not being on payroll, bank representatives who confirmed that the Shell Corporation's activities matched the timeline of when the money disappeared. And then they called me. I took the stand on a Tuesday morning wearing the same navy suit I'd worn to my arraignment. Amanda Chen approached me with something like respect in her eyes. Ms. Reeves, can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendants? David Whitmore is my husband, I said. Or was. We're separated pending divorce. Melissa Whitmore is his sister. And when did you first learn that you were under investigation for embezzlement? Late October. The company's auditors found discrepancies in the accounts and traced them to shell corporations created using my social security number. What was your reaction? Confusion, fear. I didn't create those corporations. I didn't embezzle anything. I looked directly at David. But someone wanted people to think I did. David's attorney objected. Speculation, Your Honor. Sustained, Judge Patterson said. Ms. Reeves, please stick to what you know firsthand. Amanda nodded. What happened after the investigation began? David and Melissa came to my apartment. They told me I should take responsibility, that fighting would only make my sentence worse. They had a confession prepared. They said if I signed it, the prosecutor might offer a lighter sentence. Did they mention anything about getting a lawyer? They said a public defender wouldn't be able to help me, that I should just accept what was happening. And did you sign the confession? I did. I paused. But I'd already retained Alexander Hunt as my attorney. I signed it knowing he would challenge it in court. Why did you do that? Because I wanted them to think they'd won. I wanted them to believe their plan had worked. I looked at David and Melissa again. And then I wanted to watch their plan fall apart. The courtroom was silent. No further questions, Amanda said. David's attorney stood for cross-examination. He was good. I could see why David had hired him. He tried to paint me as vindictive, as someone who'd fabricated evidence to frame my husband and sister-in-law. But I'd been preparing for this for weeks. Alexander and I had rehearsed every possible question, every angle of attack. Ms. Reeves, isn't it true that you had access to all of Whitmore Industries' financial systems? I had access as part of my job, yes. So, you could have created these shell corporations yourself? If I wanted to embezzle money, I wouldn't have used my own social security number. That would be stupid. Perhaps you thought you wouldn't get caught. Then I wouldn't have hired the best defense attorney in the state before I was even charged with a crime. I smiled. That doesn't sound like someone who expected to get caught, does it? He tried a few more angles, but I didn't budge. Finally, he gave up. No further questions. I stepped down from the witness stand and returned to my seat. Alexander gave me a small nod of approval. The defense didn't call David or Melissa to testify. Their attorneys were smart enough to know that would be suicide. Instead, they tried to argue reasonable doubt. Maybe the evidence was circumstantial. Maybe someone else had framed both Claire and the Whitmores. Maybe the forensic accounting was flawed. Dr. Kim destroyed those arguments in rebuttal testimony. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Judge Patterson scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. David and Melissa were remanded into custody immediately. No bail for convicted felons facing serious prison time. I watched the bailiffs lead them away. David looked back at me once, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. Melissa was crying, mascara running down her cheeks. I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet sense of completion. It was over. Sentencing day was anticlimactic. Judge Patterson gave David 12 years for his role as the primary architect of the scheme. Melissa got 10 years for her participation. Both would be eligible for parole after serving 85% of their sentences, the standard for white-collar crimes in New York. Richard Whitmore sat alone in the gallery, his face gray. He'd testified against his own children, providing details about their access to the company and their expensive lifestyle that the embezzled money had funded. The press had crucified him for it, calling him a traitor to his family. But he'd done it anyway. After the sentencing, he approached me in the hallway. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not letting them get away with it. For being stronger than I was." I looked at this old man, his empire crumbling around him. Whitmore Industries will survive this, Richard. You'll rebuild. Maybe, he smiled sadly, but I'll never get my children back. They made their choices, I said. So did you. He nodded and walked away. Alexander appeared at my elbow. Debu, how are you feeling? Tired, I admitted. But good, really good. You should. You just took down 2 people who tried to destroy your life. He handed me a folder. Speaking of which, the civil suit settlements came through. David and Melissa's assets are being seized to pay restitution to Whitmore Industries. But there's a portion allocated for damages to you personally. I opened the folder. The number made me blink. $1.2 million, Alexander said, amazed. For defamation, emotional distress, and legal fees. Judge Patterson was particularly generous in her assessment of damages. $1.2 million. More money than I'd ever imagined having. There's one more thing, Alexander said. He pulled out another document. I've been approached by several firms interested in your story. Book deals, movie rights, speaking engagements. They think you could be an advocate for the wrongly accused. I'm not interested in being famous, I said. I figured. So I had my assistant draft a polite decline for all of them, but there is one opportunity you might want to consider. He handed me a business card. Ever heard of the Innocence Alliance? I had. They were a nonprofit that provided legal services to people wrongly convicted of crimes. They'd overturned hundreds of convictions, freed dozens of innocent people from prison. They're expanding their operations and looking for someone to head their financial crimes division. Someone who understands what it's like to be on the wrong end of a false accusation. Alexander smiled. I may have recommended you. I looked at the card, Director of Financial Crimes Division, Innocence. Alliance. It doesn't pay what you could make in the private sector, Alexander said. But it's meaningful work, and you'd be helping people who are exactly where you were, innocent and fighting a system designed to convict. I thought about my first life. Prison, the medical ward, dying alone, and I thought about this life. The rebirth that had given me a second chance. When do I start? I asked. 3 months later, I walked into my new office at the Innocence Alliance headquarters in Manhattan. It was smaller than my apartment with a view of a brick wall and furniture that had seen better days. But it was mine. My first case file was waiting on the desk. Marcus Chen, convicted of embezzling from his employer based on circumstantial evidence and a confession obtained without proper legal representation. He'd been in prison for 8 years. I opened the file and started reading. The patterns were familiar: planted evidence, a rushed investigation, a public defender who'd been overworked and underprepared, a confession signed in desperation. But this time, I knew how to fight back. I picked up the phone and called Alexander Hunt. I need a forensic accountant, I said when he answered, someone who can tear apart an embezzlement case from 2017. I know just the person, Alexander said. Dr. Kim owes me a favor. Perfect, and I'll need discovery files from the original trial. Already on it, I'll have my assistant send them over. I smiled. You know, for a guy who charges $800 an hour, you're doing a lot of pro bono work lately. Let's just say you've inspired me, Alexander said. Besides, taking down corrupt prosecutors is more fun than defending hedge fund managers. Who knew? We worked through the afternoon, building a strategy for Marcus Chen's appeal. It felt good, purposeful, like I was finally using everything I'd learned, everything I'd survived to help someone else. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I hope you're happy. You destroyed our family. I didn't need to check the sender to know it was from David. He'd been trying to reach me for months. Letters from prison, calls from his attorney, desperate messages claiming he'd been set up, that I'd misunderstood, that we could still fix things. I blocked the number and went back to work. 6 months after that, I stood in a different courtroom with Marcus Chen beside me. Dr. Kim had torn apart the prosecution's case, revealing the same patterns of planted evidence and digital manipulation that had been used against me. The real embezzler, Marcus's supervisor, had been arrested 3 weeks earlier. Judge Patterson, who'd requested to hear the appeal personally, reviewed the new evidence with her characteristic thoroughness. "Mr. Chen," she said, "it is the finding of this court that you were wrongly convicted based on insufficient evidence and prosecutorial misconduct. Your conviction is hereby overturned and you are free to go." Marcus broke down crying. His wife rushed from the gallery to embrace him. Their daughter, who'd been 9 when he was convicted, 17 now, stood frozen, like she couldn't believe this was real. I watched them reunite and felt something crack open in my chest. This was why I'd been given a second chance. Not just to save myself, but to save others. That night, I met Alexander for dinner at an upscale Italian place in Midtown. He'd insisted on celebrating the win. "To justice," he said, raising his wine glass. "To second chances," I countered. We clinked glasses. "You know," Alexander said, "when you first called me 5 years ago, I thought you were insane. A woman claiming she'd been reborn from the future, that she needed me to help her fake sign a confession just so I could get it thrown out in court." He shook his head. "I almost hung up on you." "What changed your mind?" "You paid my retainer in full, in cash, from a bank account that didn't legally exist yet." Grinned. "That bought you at least one meeting." I laughed. And then you told me details about the case that hadn't happened yet. Shell corporations that would be created. Wire transfers that would be made. You laid out their entire plan like you'd already lived through it. Because I had. "I believe you," he said. "I don't understand it, and I'm not sure I want to, but I believe you." He leaned back in his chair. "So what really happened? In the first timeline?" I'd never told him the full story. Just the pieces he needed to build the defense. "I went to prison," I said quietly. 12 years. I fought the conviction for the first 2 years, but without evidence, without resources. Eventually, I gave up. David divorced me. The family pretended I didn't exist. I died of pneumonia 3 months before my release. Jesus, Claire. And then I woke up 5 years in the past. In my apartment, next to David. Like nothing had happened. I took a sip of wine. Thought I was going crazy for the first week. Kept waiting to wake up in the prison medical ward. But when the audit started, when David and Melissa came to me with the confession, I knew it was real. And you called me. You were the only person who'd ever believed me. Even for 15 minutes in a prison pro bono clinic. I met his eyes. I knew if anyone could save me, it was you. We saved each other, Alexander said. That case put me back on the map. I'd been coasting on old victories for years, taking easy corporate cases, playing it safe. Then you walked in with an impossible case and reminded me why I became a lawyer in the first place. To bankrupt innocent people with legal fees? To fight for people who deserve better. He smiled, which, as it turns out, is much more satisfying than defending pharmaceutical executives. We finished dinner talking about the Innocence Alliance's next cases, the reforms we wanted to push for, the system we wanted to change. It was past midnight when I finally got home to my new apartment, a 1-bedroom in Brooklyn that I'd bought with the settlement money. No more living in David's space, sleeping in sheets he'd chosen, cooking in a kitchen he'd designed. This was mine. I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. In my first life, I died believing the world was cruel and unfair. That people like David and Melissa always won because they were willing to lie and cheat and destroy anyone who got in their way. But I'd been wrong. The world wasn't fair, but it could be fought. Justice wasn't guaranteed, but it could be won. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very determined, you got a second chance to make things right. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Chen. "Thank you for giving me my life back." I smiled and typed back, "Thank you for letting me help." Another text came through, this one from Dr. Kim. "New case just landed on my desk. Financial, fraud, planted evidence, the whole 9 yards. Interested?" I looked at the time, 12:47 a.m. Send me the file, I replied. Because that was the thing about second chances. Once you got one, you couldn't stop fighting for other people to have them too. I opened my laptop and got to work. 2 years later, the Innocence Alliance had overturned 14 convictions in financial crime cases. We'd exposed corruption in 3 district attorneys' offices, forced reforms in how confessions were obtained, and trained public defenders across the state in forensic accounting basics. Marcus Chen now worked for us as an investigator. His experience as a wrongly convicted man gave him insights no one else had. He could spot the patterns of false accusations, understand the desperation that led people to sign coerced confessions. Dr. Kim had basically moved into our offices. She'd taken a pay cut from her private consulting work, but as she told me over coffee one morning, catching real criminals is more fun than testifying for defense attorneys trying to create reasonable doubt. And Alexander Hunt had become our most reliable pro bono partner. His firm handled the complex appeals, the high-profile cases that needed media attention to force the system to listen. We were a team, a strange, improbable team born from my second chance at life. On the anniversary of my rebirth, I took the day off and drove upstate to a small town I'd never visited in my first life. I'd looked up the prison where I'd died, Cold Spring Correctional Facility, a medium-security institution that looked exactly as bleak as I remembered. I didn't go inside. I just sat in my car across the street, staring at the razor wire and guard towers. In another timeline, I was still in there. Or I'd already died in there. But in this timeline, I was free. I thought about sending a letter to David, something philosophical about choices and consequences and how the universe sometimes balances the scales. But that felt too much like gloating. Instead, I started the car and drove back to the city. I had work to do. 5 years after my rebirth, I was speaking at a legal conference in Boston about wrongful convictions in financial crime cases. The audience was mostly lawyers, advocates, and law students. I'd gotten better at public speaking, learned to channel the rage and fear from my first life into something productive. The system isn't designed to protect the innocent, I told them. It's designed to secure convictions. And when you combine that with crimes that are complex, technical, and easy to pin on whoever has access to the accounts, innocent people go to prison. I clicked to the next slide. Statistics on financial crime convictions, rates of wrongful imprisonment, average time served before exoneration. But it doesn't have to be this way. Better forensics, better defense, better training for prosecutors to actually investigate instead of just building cases around convenient suspects. I paused. And better support for people like you, people willing to fight for the wrongly accused, even when it's hard, even when it's complicated, even when the evidence looks damning. After the presentation, a young woman approached me, law student, early 20s, with the intense earnestness of someone who still believed in justice. Ms. Reeves, I just wanted to say, your story is amazing. How you fought back, how you won, it's inspiring. Thank you, I said. Can I ask you something? She hesitated. Do you ever wish you could go back and tell your past self what was going to happen? Like warn yourself before any of it started? I thought about the question. About waking up 5 years in the past, about all the knowledge I'd carried from my first life. I did go back, I said, in a way, and I used what I knew to save myself. But before that, before the embezzlement charges, before the investigation, would you warn yourself not to marry David, not to work for Whitmore Industries? I considered this. No. She looked surprised. If I'd avoided David, avoided that job, I would have avoided the pain, but I also wouldn't have learned what I needed to learn. I wouldn't have met the people I've met, helped the people I've helped. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the most important work we'll ever do. So, you're glad it happened. I'm glad I survived it. I'm glad I fought back. And I'm glad I'm using what I learned to help others survive and fight back too. I smiled. That's the best revenge, really. Not just winning, but making sure the system that tried to destroy you has to change. She nodded slowly, processing this. Now, if you'll excuse me, I said, I have a plane to catch. New case in Chicago, another wrongful conviction, another planted evidence scheme, and I have exactly 10 hours to review the files before I meet with the client. Good luck, she said. Thanks, but luck has nothing to do with it. I picked up my briefcase. It's all preparation, evidence, and having the right team. I left the conference center and caught a cab to the airport, already pulling up case files on my tablet. Somewhere in Chicago, someone was sitting in a cell for a crime they didn't commit. Someone was being told by their overworked public defender that they should consider a plea deal, that fighting would only make things worse. Someone was exactly where I'd been in my first life. But this time, they had me. And I had learned, through death, rebirth, and the fight of my life, exactly how to win. I opened the case file and started reading. The confession had been signed 3 days ago, obtained without counsel, full of procedural violations. I smiled. This was going to take me less than 10 minutes to get thrown out. Some things never changed.